Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're taking a look at Shadowdark. This is a role-playing game by Kelsey Dion from the Arcane Library. I've talked to Kelsey before in the past. I did a whole interview with her. In fact, I'll put a link to that down below. This is a old school role-playing game that she's developed. Now, Kelsey is normally a 5th edition adventure writer and a very proficient one at that. She's very good at writing adventures. I think some of her adventures have won the best from Bryce Lynch over at 10 Foot Pole, which is pretty high praise. So it's really interesting to see her moving from the whole 5e publishing arena to the old school. And I was very curious to see how she's doing that in this Shadowdark RPG, which is now on Kickstarter. Links are in the description below. Now, this is a sponsored review. Kelsey did ask me to review this for her Kickstarter, but I will, of course, be giving my honest opinions on what I see in the book, what I like about it, what I think could be improved in it, and hopefully that will give you a really good idea of whether it is a game that is right for you. It is a quite substantial book. It is, let me see the table of contents here, 323 pages or so, 330. So there's a lot of content in there. It is a complete role-playing game. It's got all the spells, all the monsters, all the classes that you're going to need to run something in an old school style. And from looking through it before, it is quite compatible with typical D&D or old school D&D stats. So things that were published in the past for D&D are going to fit pretty well with this, including things like, Knave and old school essentials and stuff like that. The book starts out with the basics, so a brief rundown of how the game works, and it'll be very familiar to anyone who has run a D&D-like game before. It's D20 based, you're gonna roll a D20, you're trying to hit a difficulty class, and you're just adding or subtracting a number from your ability scores. Encumbrance is slot-based, which I like quite a bit. That's how my game works. And you basically have 10 slots for carrying equipment or your strength stat, whichever is higher. And most items take up 1 slot. So that's going to make it very easy to calculate how much you can carry. There are 6 ancestries here, or races. You got goblins, dwarves, elves, half-orcs, halflings, and humans. And they all basically just give you one super simple little ability. You don't have to mess around with them too much. For example, halflings are stealthy. Once per day, you can become invisible for 3 rounds. Humans, you gain 1 additional talent roll at first level. Stuff like that. For our classes, you have 4 basic classes. You got fighters, we have priests, thieves, and wizards. And each of them is just done on 1 page. It's very straightforward. Let's look at, for example, a fighter. Each of these classes has a number of special abilities that go along with for every fighter. For example, Hauler, where you can carry a few more slots, or Weapon Mastery, where you can choose one type of weapon and gain a +1 to attack and damage with that type of weapon. In addition, add half your level to these rolls, so you can get really good at one particular weapon. And there's also talents. So every class can gain one of these talents from this randomized table down below. So that you could have a rare one, like rolling a 2, you gain Weapon Mastery with an additional weapon, or there's a more common one like add +2 to Strength, Dexterity, or Constitution. And each of our fighters has this where there's some abilities that they always get, and then a talent that sets them apart a little bit. So you're not totally sure when you're creating your character, because this is randomized, which of these talents you're going to get and how you're going to be a little bit unique. Other features include backgrounds that you can randomly get, and those are going to give you advantage in a particular situation. So for example, if you are an herbalist, you want to try and find the right herb, you get to roll 2 d20s and choose the better one there. You have alignment, you have a number of deities that are going to be more useful if you are a priest, for example. And there are titles that are a little bit more like flavor that are going to go along with the different levels that you get as you level up. And that's going to depend on your alignment as well. So for example, fighters have different titles for whether they are lawful, chaotic, or neutral. Reminds me a bit of Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, if you're starting with a level 0 character, you can randomly generate the kinds of gear that you are carrying here. You just roll, get D4 items from this table over on the left side. But if you are a higher level character, you can roll your gold and actually buy stuff. There's some rundowns of your different types of gear over here and what they cost. They typically all take up 1 slot, though some of the small ones can be bundled together. And there's a crawling kit, which I think is a useful way to package your standard adventuring gear. So it costs 7 gold pieces rather, and it uses 7 gear slots, and you just get all your standard dungeoneering equipment. Gaining XP in this game is mostly going to come from getting treasure, and you're going to need an amount of XP equal to your own level times 10. So if you're at level 3, you need 30 XP, and then you would lose all of that XP and you start over again, trying to get up to 40 to graduate to level 4. Getting a level gives you more hit points, and it also might get you a new talent that you can add onto your character, make them a little bit more unique. I do appreciate that there is a way to completely randomly generate a character from scratch just using these 2 pages right here. So you can get a new character, I don't know, 1 minute just by pulling out your character sheet, rolling on each table, filling in your stuff, and you're good to go. Next up, we have the rules for magic right here. So this is a roll to cast magic system. You're gonna be rolling a d20 and adding your intelligence if you're a wizard, or your wisdom if you are a priest. And if you succeed at the check while casting the spell, then the spell works. If you fail at the check, then the spell also fails and you can't cast it again until you have a rest. Things get a little bit more interesting if you get a critical success on that, where you get to double one of the spell's numerical attributes. And if you have a critical failure, not only does the spell not work, but you could be rolling on the mishaps table if you're a wizard. And there's a bunch of different mishaps right here, getting more and more dangerous depending on how powerful the spell was. So wizard mishap tier 5, this could range anything from devastation, where roll twice and combine both effects on this table, so something really, really bad. Or shred, you tear a hole in the fabric of the universe close to you. The lightless tear grows larger every round. That doesn't sound good. Or arcane obstruction, you lose the ability to cast all spells of a random tier until you complete a rest. So there's a wide variety of different effects. This does, again, remind me of Dungeon Crawl Classics. I like how there's a lot of inspiration from that in this particular game, although it is kind of distilled down a bit. Dungeon Crawl Classics really revels in having gigantic tables for everything, whereas this is a little bit more condensed. If you are a priest and your spell goes badly enough, then you may have to do penance. And what the penance is going to depend on who your god is and what they value and what you're going to have to do to make up for this. Although you could just have to pay gold for it at a nearby temple. The book has lots of examples of spells for both priests and wizards. Here's the examples right here. There's 5 tiers, tier 5 being the most powerful type of spell. And they're all classic type stuff: Cure Wounds, Holy Weapon, Light, and things like that for priests. Whereas you have Burning Hands and Acid Arrow and Misty Step, and Disintegrate, Hold Monster, things like that for wizards. The descriptions are very terse. They really get to the point, and I like that about a good spell description because I don't like reading huge long paragraphs. Spells are weird enough that in any game you're going to have to be making calls probably on how they work. So I usually like having just the basics and leaving enough up to me to adjudicate any edge cases. Let's look at an example right here. Burning Hands. That's a tier 1 wizard spell, duration instant, range close. You spread your fingers with thumbs touching, unleashing a circle of flame that roars out to a close area around where you stand. Creatures within the area take 1d6 damage and flammable objects catch on fire. Very simple, straightforward, easy to understand. Now, time is one of the most unusual rules in the Shadowdark RPG, where the default setting is that time passes in the game world in real time. So a lot of the rules in this game, as we'll see going forward, are tied to how much time has actually passed on the clock. For example, your torches run out every actual hour. So if you're playing a 3-hour game, that's enough to use up 3 torches of your character's inventory. The goal here is really just to make things as simple and streamlined as possible so that you're not tracking how much time is passing in the game world as something distinct from in the real world, which a lot of times old school D&D uses. There's this idea of the dungeon turn in old school D&D where there's a 10-minute chunk of time that a lot of rules are tied onto. And usually like every 2 of these turns, you're going to be rolling a random encounter, for example. But Shadowdark does away with that and puts things more on a real clock. And it anchors things to actual gameplay that's happening in the real world. For example, the way that encounters work, as we'll see a bit further on, is that you roll a random encounter after a certain number of rounds have gone by. A round in this case being every player at the table having done something. So you don't track how much time has happened in the game world, you just track how many times we've gone around the table taking actions. Now, on the one hand, I can see how this would be very useful, and especially for newer game masters because it's just less things to track. On the other hand, you could run into situations where there is a conflict between how much time is happening in the game world and how much is happening in the real world. And then you would have to maybe update the clock. Here it says every moment in the game doesn't have to be counted for in real time. For example, if the characters want to spend 10 minutes examining a room, the GM and players could agree that time passes. When time passes, the GM and players move any timers down by that amount. But then the clocks that you're using in the real world are being adjusted by what's happening in the game world. I feel like in some situations that could get confusing. Although, I mean, the game master's fiat rules all, but I would just watch out for those sorts of conflicts. That could be a problem for some people. But if you really agree to stick to just using real world time, this could be a really simple and straightforward solution. Initiative is basically you decide who has the first initiative, and then you go around the table clockwise from them, which is great. That's basically what I do anyway. It's very similar to a side-based initiative. Light sources, as I said, take up 1 hour of real time. Again, you're going to run into these interesting conflicts. For example, if you have a torch going and then someone starts another torch, do you now need 2 timers? keeping track of an hour of real time for each. The book suggests solutions. For example, the new light could ride along on the current timer, and just when the first torch ends, any new torches would also end, and then they would just start over from there. Or you could extinguish all old light sources and start a fresh timer with the fresh light source. So you got to watch out for those sorts of things. Combat works as it does in standard D&D, where you're rolling a d20 and trying to hit an armor class and then dealing damage. The way that death works is that if you go down to 0 hit points, then you're automatically unconscious and dying, and you'll roll a d4 plus your con, and that is this timer that starts ticking down until you actually die for good, unless someone heals you or stabilizes you. When you're traveling overland, it has rules for how often you check for encounters, depending on how dangerous the environment is. So if it's unsafe, you check every 3 hours, risky every 2 hours, deadly, check every hour. Now, it doesn't say here whether it's referring to in world time or in real world time, which would make a really big difference. Since people tend to skip over overland travel pretty quickly, I would guess that this is referring to in world time, but it's not totally clear from the rules. So I think that's something that could be clarified here. A great way to gain XP is by carousing. I love carousing rules, and it's great that Shadowdark has these. So if you gain up a whole bunch of gold and you want to blow it all in a huge party and get some XP in the process, you look down here at the carousing event table and you decide how much money do you want to spend. Do you want to spend, say, 100 gold pieces? That will give you a full day and night of revelry, gambling, and recounting your exploits, all the way up to 1,800 gold points if you want to do a gigantic party that takes over a whole city. And then what you're going to do is you're going to roll on a table and add this bonus, depending on how giant your party is. And that's going to tell you the outcome. So bigger parties are going to tend to have more catastrophic or wilder outcomes, but you're likely to get more XP along with it. For example, if you roll a 7, then you led an entire tavern in a wildly insulting song about a disliked noble, but you gain 4 XP and a famous ally bard to boot. What's also fun is that the game comes along with an actual gambling game that you can play in the real world for when you are gambling in taverns called Wizards and Thieves. I really like how the Game Master section is very much to the point and doesn't just go on with, platitudes about how you're the Game Master and you just trust your imagination and things will work out. It tells you exactly what you need to know in terms of how to run this type of game. For example, we have the core ethos right here. Time, the most important resource. It must haunt the character's every decision. They don't have time to search every floor tile for a trap because, your torches are running out and random encounters are happening. Or telegraph danger and choices matter. These are some core OSR principles that really put the focus of the game on what the players decide to do given the options that they have, right? It's not about guiding players through a scenario. It's about putting strange situations in front of them and seeing what they do. I like this principle right here. Let there be darkness, attack the light. The main source of time pressure in Shadowdark is the limited duration of light sources. So it has a whole bunch of different ways here that you can attack their light sources to put that pressure on them. Like have enemies try to extinguish their light sources, imperil torches and lanterns on the random encounter tables, have opposing spellcasters hit the target of light spells with dispel magic or other magic neutralizing effects. If the players run out of light in a dungeon, they're in serious trouble. They're going to have major disadvantages on all of anything that they do, really, and they'll even struggle to get out of that dungeon. Meanwhile, all the monsters will start crowding in around them because they can mostly see in the dark and tear the PCs to pieces. This means that players are going to have to pack torches and track how many they have in their inventory to make sure they have enough to get through this adventure. Now, torches only run out after an hour of real time, which is quite a long time. So given that an actual dungeon session is, 2 or 3 hours, does a party only need to pack 2 or 3 torches? That doesn't seem like very much. So in order to actually put pressure on them, I would take Kelsey's advice here and just attack the light as much as possible. The game comes with a number of modes of play like Blitz mode, where light timers last 30 minutes, or Fatality mode, characters die at 0 hit points. Little modifiers you can add to the game. There's rules for random encounters here, which are standard D&D stuff. When you have an encounter, you roll to see how far away it is, what it's doing, what its reaction is, so that even the game master is not going to be totally sure as to what this thing is doing or how it's going to react. So it's a surprise for everyone. The game includes a whole section on how to run a funnel adventure, which is called the Gauntlet right here for level 0 characters. This is typically when you get each player controls a number of 0 level characters, and then they run through a really dangerous environment. Hopefully at least one of your characters survives to the end, and then they can graduate into a level 1 character. I've done a bunch of these and they're always really fun. Rather than having 1 XP for every gold coin, as it is in traditional D&D, it's abstracted a little bit here. So for example, a poor quality treasure does give you any XP, like a used dagger. But a normal one, like a bag of gold, is 1 XP. Something fabulous, like a magic sword, is 3 XP. And something truly legendary, like a staff of Ord or a genie's wish or a dragon hoard, is 10 XP, which is typically going to take you up an entire level. One of my favorite things about Shadowdark is that it is absolutely packed with random tables, which is wonderful. This is my favorite thing to see in a core rulebook. So many core rulebooks spend their time filling it up with just like background lore, which you always tend to forget, or tons of rules, which you have to look up all the time. I think it's much more useful to fill that page count with stuff that you put in the world. We got rumors, adventures, NPCs, NPC names, Shadowdark maps, overland hex maps, settlement maps. You want to create a random tavern? There you go. You got shops. You have different environments that you can explore. Arctic encounters, castle districts, caves, deep tunnels, deserts, forests, grasslands, high districts. It goes on and on and on like this, which is great, because if you're creating a open world setting, this is the stuff that you need. You need things to put in your world for your players to encounter. So this is the book going out of its way to give you that content to make your life easier. After about 60 pages of those random tables, we get to the section on monsters. And we have a monster generator here that you can use to quickly create some weird monstrosity for your players to deal with. Maybe you get an amphibious monster and its strength is that it's highly intelligent, but its weakness is electricity. You want to make it weird? Add some stuff on, like it has tentacles, it breathes fire, or it has sonic blasts. Lots of great examples right here. We have actual write-ups of plenty of monsters, all done in nice, compact stat blocks. Something as simple as an ape. It's a hooting omnivorous ape that live in trees. Armor class 12, hit points 10, attack is 1 fist plus 2, that's plus 2 to hit, does 1d6 damage, or you can throw 1 rock, it's a far range, and does 1d4 damage. You got movement. The things are more abstracted for movement, like near, far, things like that. And you have your stats, in case you actually need a stat, strength, dexterity, constitution, and so on. And some of them have a little bit more special abilities. Maybe something like an archmage has a bunch of spells here, but the spells are all built in so that you don't have to go and look it up in the spell section. All the information is on the stat block, which is wonderful. Lots and lots and lots of monsters. Some of them quite significant if you want boss monsters like Mordanticus the Flayed. After all the monsters, we get into the treasure. And as before, we have lots of random tables to generate your types of treasure. Or you can just roll on one of these tables, or you can create your own. So it could be an ivory tusk carved with angels battling demons. That's really nice. A taxidermied Smilodon. Maybe you have a giant radiant pearl, or a dagger with emerald in the pommel. There's tables for generating weird types of armor, new magic potions, curses or benefits for wearing magical armor, scrolls and wands, magic weapons that could do things like you can cut and smash through any material, or they might have drawbacks like you must loudly praise a god whenever you see its symbol. It has notes on designing your own magic items, and then it just has tons of magic items for you to distribute to your players. Maybe you got a Pearl of Power. The benefit is once per day, you may regain the ability to cast a spell that you've lost. This cannot restore a spell lost due to critical spellcasting failure. And at the end, we have your character sheet with space for all of your basic stats for you to fill in. So that's it for the Shadowdark RPG. Hopefully this overview was helpful for you in terms of seeing what is in the book and if it is right for you. Definitely a very complete game. It has everything that you're going to need. It's extremely clear and well written. The only controversial thing, I suppose, in it is the real-time time thing, which I think is pretty interesting, but could very easily be tweaked in one way or another depending on your preferences. Personally, I would not hesitate to play in this game, and I love that it is compatible with all the D&D stuff that I already have. If it looks cool to you, remember to click the link in the description below and check it out on Kickstarter, where it is live right now. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.